I watched my stepsister Vanessa fasten the clasp of my grandmother's sapphire necklace around her throat, and in that moment, I knew exactly how this night would end. The same way it had ended in my previous life, with me gasping for air on a hospital gurney while my family stood around my deathbed, not with grief, but with relief that the obstacle to their perfect lives was finally gone. But this time, I had a secret. This time, I remembered everything. Mom, look! Vanessa twirled in front of the mirror, the sapphires catching the light. Doesn't it match my dress perfectly? My stepmother, Patricia, clapped her hands together. Oh, darling, you look like a princess. That necklace was made for you. I stood in the doorway of Vanessa's bedroom, invisible as always. The necklace hadn't been made for her. It had been made for my grandmother on her wedding day in 1952, passed down to my mother, and then to me on her deathbed when I was 8 years old. The only thing I had left of the woman who had actually loved me. Take it off, Vanessa. My voice came out steady, cold, different from the pleading, desperate tone I'd used in my first life. They both turned to look at me as if I were an insect that had crawled out from under the baseboard. Excuse me? Patricia's perfectly microbladed eyebrows rose. Who do you think you're speaking to? I said take it off. That necklace belongs to me. Grandmother left it to me specifically in her will. Vanessa laughed, a tinkling sound that my father always called musical. Oh, Charlotte, don't be so selfish. I have the Pemberton Academy Spring Gala tonight, and Bradley Harrington will be there. His family owns half the commercial real estate in the city. I need to look my absolute best. Then wear your own jewelry. This is my jewelry now, Vanessa said, touching the sapphires possessively. Everything in this house belongs to the family. You're part of this family, aren't you? So stop being such a... She's being a jealous bitch is what she's being, Patricia interrupted. Charlotte, your sister has an opportunity to make an advantageous match tonight. Surely you're not so petty that you'd stand in the way of her future over a piece of jewelry. In my previous life, I'd backed down at this point. I'd swallowed my anger, told myself it was just one night, that Vanessa would return it. But Vanessa hadn't returned it. She'd lost it at the gala, or so she claimed. I suspected she'd actually sold it, but I'd never been able to prove it. By the time I'd worked up the courage to tell my father, Patricia had convinced him I was being hysterical and attacking Vanessa out of jealousy. That had been the beginning of the end. The necklace had been appraised at $45,000. It was worth far more to me. Keep it, I said quietly. Both of them blinked at me in surprise. Really? Vanessa's face lit up. Oh, Charlotte, I knew you'd come around. You're being so mature about this. I'm not being mature. I'm done. I turned and walked out of her room down the hallway to my own much smaller bedroom at the back of the house, the one that used to be a maid's quarters. Behind me, I heard Patricia say, well, that was surprisingly easy. Maybe she's finally learning her place. I closed my door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. In my previous life, I had died at 23 years old. I'd collapsed during my final medical school exam, the one I'd been studying for while working 2 jobs to pay my own tuition because my father had decided that his money should go entirely toward Vanessa's career as an Instagram influencer and her online boutique that never turned a profit. The autopsy revealed chronic poisoning. Small doses of antifreeze mixed into my food over the course of months. The police had investigated, but there was no proof. My stepmother had been very, very clever. She'd made sure I prepared most of my own meals, never obviously handled my food. The case went cold. I woke up 10 years earlier on my 13th birthday, 3 weeks after my father had married Patricia and moved her and Vanessa into our family home. For the past 5 years, I'd been playing the long game, being obedient, being invisible, watching, learning, and most importantly, documenting everything. I pulled out my laptop and opened the encrypted folder I'd been building since my rebirth. Photos, videos, financial records, text messages I'd recovered from the cloud, email chains, every piece of evidence I'd collected of my family's systematic abuse. But I'd learned something important in my 5 years of second chances. Revenge wasn't about exposing them to a world that wouldn't care. My father was Richard Pemberton, chairman of Pemberton Industries, worth approximately $300 million. Patricia had married him for his money. Vanessa was the beautiful princess daughter who could do no wrong in his eyes. And I was the quiet, awkward stepdaughter with my mother's eyes, a constant reminder of the wife he'd lost to cancer. The world would take his side. Wealthy men were always believed over bitter daughters. No, my revenge needed to be more personal, more complete, more devastating. I opened my email and pulled up the message I'd been drafting for weeks. Dear Grandmother Eloise, you don't know me, but I'm Charlotte Pemberton, your son Richard's daughter. My mother was Catherine Walsh. I know you and father have been estranged since before I was born, but I'm writing to you because I need help. In my previous life, I hadn't known my father's mother was still alive until after my death, when I'd seen her mentioned in an article about a philanthropic foundation. My father had cut off all contact with her 20 years ago after she'd opposed his first business deal, a deal that turned out to be built on fraud. She'd been right, and he'd never forgiven her for it. But Grandmother Eloise had tried to reach out to me. The letters I'd never received, because Patricia intercepted them. The trust fund she'd set up that I'd never known about because my father had hidden it. All of it documented in legal records I'd painstakingly uncovered using my adult knowledge and a teenager's unlimited time. I hit send. 3 days later, I received a response. Then a phone call, then a private meeting at a cafe across town that I snuck out to during school hours. Grandmother Eloise was 78 years old, sharp as a tack, and absolutely furious when I showed her everything I'd collected. That woman is poisoning you, Isaias, she said, her hands shaking as she looked at the photos I'd taken of Patricia, adding powder to the meal prep containers I stored in the garage fridge. The one place I'd thought was safe. I'd installed a hidden camera after noticing the strange, bitter taste in my food. Not yet, I said. Not for another 5 years in the original timeline. But she's already started. Small doses, testing to see if I notice. Grandmother Eloise looked at me with those same sharp blue eyes my father had inherited. You keep saying original timeline. Charlotte, I want to believe you, but you had a birthmark on your left shoulder blade shaped like a butterfly. You removed it 3 years ago because it started changing shape. You had a brief affair in 1975 with a man named James Chen, your husband's business partner. He died of bite in a car accident in 1976, and you visited his grave every year on the anniversary of his death. Your husband never knew. You told me all of this in my previous life when we finally met after I died and you fought to reopen the investigation into my death. The color drained from her face. How could you possibly? Because I've lived this already. And this time, I'm not going to die. This time, I'm going to destroy them. My grandmother stared at me for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. Tell me what you need. The Pemberton Academy Spring Gala came and went. Vanessa did not, in fact, snag Bradley Harrington. He spent most of the evening with a girl from his advanced calculus class who was headed to MIT on a full ride. Vanessa came home in tears, the sapphire necklace still around her throat. She kept it, wore it to school, to parties, posted photos of it on Instagram with captions about family heirlooms that made me want to scream. I said nothing. I smiled politely when she flaunted it. I went to my classes, maintained my 4.0 GPA, and spent my weekends having lunch with my grandmother at expensive restaurants where we planned the complete dismantling of my father's life. He stole from me, Grandmother Eloise said, over oysters and champagne one Saturday afternoon. When he left my company, he took client lists, proprietary research, trade secrets. He built Pemberton Industries on the foundation of everything he stole from Walsh Enterprises. Walsh, my mother's maiden name. The company should have been mine. Can you prove? I asked. I've had lawyers looking into it for 20 years. But Richard was clever. He buried everything under layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts. She paused. But you've given me something I never had before. Motive. He's not just a thief. He's a man who allows his wife to abuse his daughter. A man who turned his back on his own mother. Character assassination, combined with the right evidence presented at the right time. You'll need someone on the inside, I said. Someone in his company. I have people. But you're right. I need someone in his house. We looked at each other across the table. I'm 18 in 3 years, I said. Until then, I have to be very, very careful. Then we wait. We plan. And when the time comes, Grandmother Eloise smiled, and it was like looking into a mirror of my own rage. On my 16th birthday, my father forgot entirely. Patricia made a show of baking a cake, vanilla with vanilla frosting, even though she knew I was allergic to vanilla extract. "Oh, Charlotte, I'm so sorry. I forgot," she said with wide, innocent eyes when I pointed it out. Vanessa ate 3 slices. I ordered Chinese food for myself and ate it in my room while researching the Pemberton Industries corporate structure. My grandmother had been right. It was a maze designed to obscure the origin of my father's initial capital. But mazes could be mapped. Secrets could be uncovered, especially when you had access to your father's home office. That night, while the family slept, I crept downstairs with a USB drive. My father's password was Vanessa's birthday. It took me 45 minutes to copy everything on his computer, including emails dating back 15 years. I delivered them to Grandmother Eloise the next day. "Good God," she whispered, scrolling through file after file. "Charlotte, he's been embezzling from his own company. He's defrauding his investors. This isn't just theft from me. This is securities fraud. This is federal." "Is it enough?" "To destroy him? Yes, but we need to be strategic about when and how we release this." She looked at me seriously. "Charlotte, once we start this, there's no going back. Your father will go to prison. You'll lose whatever relationship you have with him." I thought about my father, the way he'd looked through me at my mother's funeral, the way he'd never once defended me from Patricia's cruelty, the way he'd told me, when I'd asked for help with college tuition in my previous life, that I should learn to manage money better while signing off on a $75,000 budget for Vanessa's 20th birthday party. "I lost my father the day he married Patricia," I said. "The man who lives in that house isn't my father. He's a stranger wearing my father's face." Grandmother Eloise nodded. "Then we move forward, but carefully. We need everything aligned perfectly." My 16th year was the year I started selling my jewelry, not all at once. Piece by piece, carefully, through online auction sites and estate jewelry dealers. The pearl earrings my father had given me for my 15th birthday, $1,200. The diamond bracelet from my mother's sister, $3,400. A gold locket, $800. Every gift, every heirloom, everything that had ever been given to me by the family that never loved me. I documented every sale, every receipt, every transaction carefully logged in a spreadsheet. Patricia noticed, of course. "Charlotte, where's that lovely bracelet Aunt Vivian gave you?" "I sold it." Her mouth fell open. "You sold it? Charlotte, that was a family piece. How could you be so disrespectful?" "It was mine. I can do what I want with it." "Your father is going to hear about this." My father's response, delivered via text message because he couldn't be bothered to speak to me in person. "Very disappointed in you, Charlotte. That kind of materialism is beneath our family." The irony was so thick, I could taste it. Vanessa was the one who really lost her mind when she found out. "You're selling your jewelry? Are you insane? How much those pieces are worth? You could be building a collection, an investment." "Like you built a collection with my grandmother's necklace?" I asked sweetly. She had the grace to flush. "That's different. You said I could have it." "I said you could keep it. I never said it was yours." I'd learned something important in my years of rebirth. Sometimes the cruelest thing you could do to people like Vanessa wasn't to take things away from them. It was to let them have what they wanted and then watch them destroy themselves with it. By my 17th birthday, I'd sold everything. Every piece of jewelry I'd ever owned, except for one small locket I kept hidden away. A locket that contained a photo of my mother and a sample of the poisoned food Patricia had been feeding me, carefully preserved and documented. I'd accumulated nearly $80,000 in cash, which I'd given entirely to my grandmother to invest in my name in accounts my father couldn't access. "Are you sure?" she'd asked. "Charlotte, this money could pay for college, set you up. I'm sure, invested in Walsh Enterprises, helped me take back what he stole." She did, and with my grandmother's savvy and my insider knowledge of Pemberton Industries' weaknesses, We started building a war chest. But more importantly, I'd started building something else, a reputation. At Pemberton Academy, I was no longer invisible. I'd stopped trying to blend in, stopped trying to be small. I joined the debate team and eviscerated my opponents with surgical precision. I started a nonprofit fundraiser for domestic abuse victims that raised $200,000 in 6 months and got written up in the local newspaper. I aced every AP test, won every academic award, and gave a speech at the academic honors ceremony that had the entire auditorium on their feet. Vanessa had been so furious, she'd accidentally spilled red wine on my dress at the reception afterward. I'd smiled at her, changed into the spare outfit I'd brought specifically for this contingency, and returned to accept congratulations from the Dean of Admissions from Stanford, who wanted to discuss early admission. My father had been there. He'd watched the whole thing with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pride? Confusion? Resentment that I was outshining his golden child? "Charlotte," he said afterward, cornering me by the refreshment table, "I had no idea you were doing so well academically." "You never asked." He flinched. "That's not fair. I've been busy with work." "You had time to attend every one of Vanessa's Instagram-sponsored content shoots. You had time to take her to Paris for her 17th birthday. But you didn't have time to notice I existed." "Charlotte, that's not you're being dramatic." "Am I? When was my birthday, Dad?" He opened his mouth, closed it. It's in the spring, isn't it?" "It was 3 months ago, February 14th. I turned 17. You forgot." I walked away before he could respond. Patricia found me in the parking lot. "That was quite a performance in there," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You made your father look like a terrible parent." "I didn't make him look like anything. I simply existed, and he proved it himself." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Getting all this attention, these awards. But you're forgetting something, Charlotte. Everything you have because of this family. This house, this school, the opportunities you've been given, all of it comes from your father's money." "Actually, Saz," I said, "my tuition at Pemberton Academy is paid by a scholarship I won based on merit. I work 15 hours a week at the library to pay for my own expenses, and the clothes I'm wearing I bought myself with money I earned. So, no, Patricia, I don't have anything because of this family. I have everything despite it." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you, given you a home, a family, a home where I'm treated like a servant. A family that can't remember my birthday." "Yes, Patricia, I'm truly blessed." For a moment, I saw something dangerous flash in her eyes. The same look I'd seen in my previous life, right before everything started going very wrong. "Be careful, Charlotte," she said softly. "Pride comes before a fall." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning from someone who cares about you." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "You don't care about me. You've never cared about me. You care about my father's money and making sure Vanessa gets every opportunity while I get nothing. But here's what you don't understand, Patricia. I don't need you. I don't need any of you. I've been preparing for the day when I can walk away from this family forever, and that day is coming very, very soon." I got in my car, a used Honda I'd bought myself, and drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night, I found rat poison in my bathroom cabinet tucked behind my tampons. I photographed it, documented it, sent the evidence to my grandmother and to a lawyer she'd retained for me specifically for this purpose. Then I moved the poison to a secure location and replaced it with a harmless powder. The war had begun. Senior year started with a bang, literally. Vanessa's online boutique, which my father had invested $150,000 into over 3 years, was exposed in a viral TikTok for selling counterfeit designer goods. The video had 3 million views in 48 hours. I had nothing to do with it, of course. I'd simply anonymously tipped off a fashion influencer who had a bone to pick with people selling fakes, and included photographic evidence of Vanessa's supplier, evidence I'd obtained by following her to a warehouse in Queens. The lawsuits came swiftly. Cease and desist letters from Gucci, Prada, Louis Vuitton. My father had to hire an entire legal team. "This is all your fault," Vanessa screamed at me across the dinner table. "You've been jealous of my success since day one. You probably sent that video to that influencer." "How would I even know who to send it to?" I asked mildly, eating my salad, which I'd prepared myself in full view of everyone after Patricia's latest attempt to season my food with something that smelled suspiciously like bleach. "I don't even have TikTok." "You're lying. You've been trying to sabotage me for years." "Vanessa, enough," my father said wearily. He looked 10 years older than he had at the start of the year. The stress of covering up his fraud was getting to him, especially now that grandmother Eloise had started quietly reaching out to his investors with concerns about accounting irregularities. "But Dad, I said enough." He slammed his hand on the table. "Charlotte has nothing to do with your poor business decisions. You were the one who decided to buy cheap knockoffs and sell them as authentic. You were the one who committed fraud. Now you have to face the consequences." Vanessa burst into tears and ran from the room. Patricia shot me a venomous look and followed her daughter. My father and I sat alone in the dining room. "You've changed," he said finally. "You used to be such a sweet, quiet girl." "I grew up." "Or you grew hard." "I grew realistic." "I learned that the world doesn't reward sweet, quiet girls. It rewards people who fight for themselves." He studied me for a long moment. "Your mother wouldn't have wanted this for you." The mention of my mother sent a spike of rage through my chest. "My mother wouldn't have wanted a lot of things. She wouldn't have wanted you to marry a woman who treats her daughter like garbage. She wouldn't have wanted you to forget your own child's birthday. She wouldn't have wanted you to steal from your own mother to build a company on lies and fraud." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about?" "I know, Dad. I know everything. About grandmother Eloise, about Walsh Enterprises, about the proprietary information you stole, the clients you poached, the patents you illegally appropriated. I know about the shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. I know about the falsified quarterly reports. I know all of it." He stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Charlotte, you don't understand business. I understand theft. I understand fraud. And I understand that everything you've built is built on lies." "Who have you been talking to?" His voice was shaking now. "Charlotte, if you've said anything to anyone..." "What? You'll what? Disown me? Kick me out?" "Dad, you haven't been a father to me in 8 years. You're not my family. You're just a man I happen to live with, and not for much longer." I stood up and left him standing there, his face pale, his hands shaking. The next morning, I woke up to find my bedroom door had been locked from the outside. I wasn't surprised. Threatened animals lash out, and I'd just revealed that I knew all my father's secrets. What surprised me was how quickly they moved. My phone was gone. My laptop was gone. When I pounded on the door, Patricia's voice came from the other side, syrupy sweet. "Charlotte, honey, your father and I are very worried about you. You've been acting so erratic lately, making wild accusations. We think you need help." "Let me out, Patricia." "We've called Dr. Morrison. He's going to come talk to you, help you understand that these paranoid thoughts you're having aren't real." Dr. Morrison. My father's golfing buddy, a psychiatrist who owed his country club membership to my father's recommendation. This was it, the move I'd been waiting for. In my previous life, they'd done something similar, but I'd been too sick from the poisoning to fight back. This time, I was ready. "Patricia, I'm not paranoid. I'm telling the truth, and you know it." "Sweetheart, no one believes you. You're just a troubled girl looking for attention." I heard footsteps walking away from the door. I immediately went to my window. I was on the second floor, but there was a trellis I'd been practicing climbing for exactly this scenario. I grabbed my emergency backpack, the one I'd packed months ago with copies of all my evidence, cash, and a burner phone, and climbed down. I was in my car and driving away within 5 minutes. I drove straight to my grandmother's estate 40 minutes outside the city. She was waiting for me at the door, her face grim. "I got your message from the lawyer. Charlotte, are you all right?" They tried to lock me in my room. They were calling a psychiatrist to declare me unstable. The bastards. She pulled me into the house. You're safe now. You're staying here. Grandmother, they're going to come looking for me. They'll say I ran away, that I'm out of control. Let them come. This is my property, and you're 17 years old enough to choose where you want to live. And I have a team of lawyers who would love nothing more than to tear your father apart. She made good on that promise. By that afternoon, the lawyers had filed for emergency guardianship, citing evidence of abuse and neglect. By that evening, they'd filed a lawsuit against my father for misappropriation of my trust fund, the one my grandmother had set up that my father had been secretly siphoning from for years. By the next morning, the FBI was at Pemberton Industries headquarters with a warrant for my father's arrest on securities fraud charges. It turned out that grandmother Eloise had been working with federal investigators for months, feeding them everything I'd uncovered, building an airtight case. My father's empire crumbled in 72 hours. The trial was a media circus. Richard Pemberton, wealthy CEO, pillar of the community, arrested for massive fraud. The story had everything: embezzlement, stolen trade secrets, falsified financial records, and, thanks to testimony from yours truly, evidence of domestic abuse. I sat in the witness stand and told my story. All of it. The neglect, the emotional abuse, the poisoning attempts, the jewelry that Vanessa had stolen and Patricia had condoned. My father's lawyer tried to paint me as a vindictive, spoiled teenager. Isn't it true, Miss Pemberton, that you hold a grudge against your father for remarrying after your mother's death? No, I said calmly. I hold a grudge against my father for abandoning me after my mother's death and allowing his new wife to abuse me for 8 years. You've made serious accusations about poisoning. Where's your proof? I nodded to my lawyer, who presented lab results. The food samples I'd preserved, medical records showing elevated levels of toxic substances in my system, from blood tests I'd secretly taken. Video footage from the hidden cameras I'd installed in the kitchen. The courtroom went silent. That woman tried to kill me, I said, pointing at Patricia, who sat beside my father in her designer suit and pearl earrings, pearls she'd stolen from my mother's jewelry box. And my father let her. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. My father was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Patricia was charged as an accessory to attempted murder and got 10 years. Vanessa, who'd been involved in some of the financial fraud, using my father's company to launder money from her counterfeit business, got 3 years probation and a massive fine she had no way to pay. The Pemberton mansion was seized to pay restitution to investors. Pemberton Industries was dissolved. Every asset was liquidated. And me? I sat in the courtroom gallery next to my grandmother and watched it all burn down. The trial ended in April of my senior year. I graduated as valedictorian in June with a full ride to Stanford. My grandmother threw me a graduation party at her estate with 200 guests, friends I'd made, teachers who'd supported me, and a handful of people from Walsh Enterprises who'd been waiting 20 years for justice against the man who'd stolen from them. Vanessa wasn't there. She'd moved in with some friends, working at a mall retail store and trying to rebuild her social media presence. But the taint of her father's crimes and her own fraud had made her toxic to brands. Her Instagram followers had dropped from 500,000 to 30,000. The comments on her posts were brutal. Patricia sent me a letter from prison. I burned it without reading it. My father wrote too. His letter, I read. Charlotte, I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. I've spent a lot of time in here thinking about where I went wrong. I told myself I was protecting you by not showing you too much affection after your mother died. I thought I was helping you become independent. I see now that I was just running away from my grief and leaving you to face yours alone. Patricia told me she was treating you well. I chose to believe her because it was easier than confronting the truth. I chose Vanessa because she reminded me of a simpler time before loss and pain, but in doing so, I lost the daughter who actually mattered. You. I don't expect you to write back. I just wanted you to know that your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become. Strong, brilliant, unstoppable. Everything I should have encouraged and didn't. I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. Richard. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a box with my mother's photos. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement that he'd finally seen me. At my graduation party, Grandmother Eloise made a toast. To Charlotte, she said, raising her champagne glass, who survived a family that tried to destroy her and came out stronger, who fought for justice and won, and who is going to do absolutely extraordinary things with her life. To Charlotte, everyone chorused. I smiled, looking around at the people who'd supported me, believed in me, fought for me. This was my family now. Not the one I'd been born into, but the one I'd chosen. After the party, my grandmother and I sat on her terrace watching the sunset. What will you do with all that money from the lawsuit settlement? She asked. The courts had awarded me significant damages for the trust fund my father had stolen, plus additional compensation for the abuse. Combined with my grandmother's investments and the money I'd saved, I had nearly $2 million in assets at 18 years old. I'm going to invest some of it in Walsh Enterprises, I said. Help you rebuild what he destroyed. Charlotte, you don't have to. I want to. Walsh Enterprises should have been my mother's legacy. Now it will be mine too. She squeezed my hand. Your mother would be so proud. I wish I could have told her. In my previous life before I died, I wish I could have told her I'd make this right. Perhaps she knew. Perhaps that's why you were given this second chance. I didn't know if I believed in cosmic justice or fate or anything like that. But I did know that I'd been given something precious. The knowledge of how my story ended and the opportunity to write a different ending. And this ending? This was so much better. Stanford was everything I dreamed of and more. I majored in business and pre-law, planning to eventually take over Walsh Enterprises and expand it into new markets. I made friends, real friends. Not the fake social climbers from Pemberton Academy. I dated, traveled, discovered who I was when I wasn't constantly fighting for survival. My grandmother gave me a seat on the Walsh Enterprises board when I turned 21. By 23, the age I'd died in my previous life, I was COO, overseeing a 40% expansion of the company and several major acquisitions, including the purchase of what remained of Pemberton Industries' assets. I renamed the subsidiary Catherine Walsh Memorial Division and used it to fund scholarships for young women from abusive homes who wanted to study business or law. On the 5th anniversary of my father's sentencing, I visited him in prison for the first time. He looked older, grayer, smaller somehow. Prison had diminished him in ways I hadn't expected. Charlotte, he said when they brought him to the visiting area. You came. I came. We sat across from each other, a plexiglass barrier between us. You look well, he said finally. Successful. I am. I read about Walsh Enterprises in the business journals. You're doing remarkable things. I learned from the best. My grandmother is an extraordinary woman. I wish I'd known her my whole life. He flinched. That's my fault. I was angry at her for being right about me, for seeing through me. I cut her off and kept you from her because I couldn't face what she represented, accountability. Why did you do it, Dad? You had everything. A successful career, a family who loved you. Why steal? Why lie? He was quiet for a long time. Because it was never enough. Every success just made me hungrier for more. I told myself I deserved it, that I was smarter than everyone else, that the rules didn't apply to me. And by the time I realized how wrong I was in too deep to stop. You could have stopped. You could have come clean, faced the consequences. I was weak. I am weak. You're strong, Charlotte. You always have been. Even when I tried to break you, you wouldn't break. You didn't try to break me, Dad. You just didn't see me at all. And that was almost worse. His eyes filled with tears. I see you now for what it's worth. It's not worth much. But it's something. We talked for another hour about my mother, about his childhood, about the man he'd wanted to be and the man he'd become. It wasn't redemption or forgiveness. It was just closure. When I left the prison, I felt lighter. The rage that had sustained me for so long had finally burned itself out, leaving behind something that felt almost like peace. I never did get my grandmother's sapphire necklace back. Vanessa had indeed sold it back when she'd first taken it. to pay for some influencer marketing course that promised to make her Instagram famous. The necklace had changed hands 3 times since then and ended up in a private collection in Dubai. I could have tracked it down, bought it back. But I realized I didn't want to. That necklace represented the old Charlotte. The girl who'd been a victim, who'd been powerless, who'd clung to objects because they were all she had left of love. Instead, I commissioned a new piece of jewelry, a necklace of my own design, a phoenix rising from flames cast in platinum and set with rubies and diamonds. It cost $60,000 and was worth every penny. I wore it to the Walsh Enterprises annual gala, my first as CEO. My grandmother had retired at 83, finally ready to rest, and had handed me the reins of the company she'd built from nothing after my father's betrayal. "You've surpassed anything I could have imagined," she told me at the gala, her hand resting on my arm. "Catherine would be so proud. I'm so proud. I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Nonsense. You've always had this strength in you, Charlotte. I just helped you find it." The gala was attended by all the major players in our industry. I gave a speech about resilience, about building something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal, about the importance of creating opportunities for women who'd been told they were worthless. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, a young reporter approached me. She was doing a piece on successful women in business. "Ms. Walsh," she said, "I'd legally changed my name to my mother's maiden name when I turned 21. There are rumors about your past, about your father, about what happened to your family. Would you be willing to comment?" I smiled. My father made choices that destroyed him. I made different choices that built me. That's not a story about victimhood. It's a story about power, the power we all have to decide who we want to be, regardless of where we come from. "And your stepfamily, Vanessa and Patricia?" I don't think about them. It was true. Vanessa occasionally popped up on social media, still trying to make influencer culture work with her dwindling followers. Patricia would be released from prison in a few years. Neither of them mattered to my life anymore. They were ghosts from a timeline that no longer existed. On my 30th birthday, I hosted a small dinner party at my penthouse apartment in Manhattan. My grandmother, now 91 but still sharp as ever. A few close friends from Stanford. My boyfriend, Marcus, a civil rights attorney I'd met at a charity function who made me laugh, and challenged me and saw me, really saw me, the way no one had before. We toasted to the future, to love, to success, to survival. Later, after everyone had left, I stood on my balcony looking out at the glittering city and thought about the girl I'd been in my first life, the girl who'd died alone, poisoned by her own family, her potential snuffed out before she'd ever really lived. That girl had gotten a second chance, and she'd taken it with both hands and refused to let go. I touched the phoenix necklace at my throat. In my first life, Vanessa had stolen my grandmother's sapphires without permission. In this life, I'd sold every piece of jewelry I owned and used the money to build an empire. Same beginning, different ending. The revenge I'd taken wasn't just about destroying the people who hurt me. It was about building something so magnificent, so undeniable that my very existence was proof of their failure to break me. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Missing you already? Dinner again tomorrow?" I smiled and texted back, "Absolutely." In my previous life, I'd been alone at the end. In this life, I was surrounded by people who loved me, respected me, chose me. That was the greatest revenge of all. Not their destruction, though that had been satisfying, but my joy, my success, my absolute, complete, triumphant happiness. I raised my champagne glass to the city, to the stars, to the universe that had given me a second chance. "Thank you," I whispered. And I meant it. Epilogue. 5 years later, Walsh Enterprises went public. The IPO was the most successful of the year, valuing the company at $4.2 billion. I rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange with my grandmother by my side, her hand clasped in mine. My father watched it on the news from prison. He wrote to congratulate me. I wrote back, thanking him for the lesson he'd taught me, that blood doesn't make family, character does. Vanessa filed for bankruptcy that same year. Her last Instagram post was a sponsored ad for diet tea that got 12 likes. Patricia was released from prison but found that no one in her former social circles would take her calls. She moved to Florida and got a job as a receptionist at a dental office. I heard she told people her daughter was in fashion. I never corrected the story, let her have her delusions. They didn't touch me. Marcus proposed on a beach in Santorini. I said yes, not because I needed someone to complete me, but because I wanted to share my complete self with someone who deserved it. My grandmother danced at my wedding. She was 96 years old and still feisty as hell. "Your mother is smiling down on you," she whispered as we waltzed. I can feel it. I believed her. The girl who died at 23, poisoned and alone, was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd taken every ounce of pain, every moment of suffering, every betrayal, and alchemized it into gold. They'd tried to make me small. I became enormous. They'd tried to silence me. I became deafening. They'd tried to erase me. I became unforgettable. And every time I fastened the phoenix necklace around my throat, I remembered. I didn't need my grandmother's sapphires. I was the jewel, rare, valuable, indestructible, and entirely, completely, gloriously mine.